Righto, thank you everyone. Welcome, and I formally declare open this council meeting of Colac Otway Shire Council on 27th of September 2023. Almighty God, we seek your blessing and guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. Amen. I'd like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. Please be advised that this meeting is recorded and live streamed with the exception of confidential matters. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The live stream recording of this afternoon's meeting will be available on the website as soon as practicable. By participating in open meetings, individuals consent to the use and disclosure of the information they share at the meeting, including any personal and/or sensitive information. I note that all 7 councillors are present. Moving on to question time, Colac Otway Shire Council encourages community input, and integral to this is the opportunity provided to ask questions at council meetings. A maximum of 30 minutes is allowed for question time at council meetings. Community members wishing to ask questions of council by video conference were requested to register their intention before 5 p.m. on Monday the 25th of September 2023. No requests were received. I've received questions in writing from James Judd, Jason Schramm and Pauline Rostos. These questions will be read out and a response will be provided by the relevant member of the Executive Management Team. In accordance with Sub-Rule 56.6.3 of Council's Governance Rules, an individual written response will only be provided to questions that have not been read out today. All written responses will be available in the minutes on the Colac Otway Shire website once confirmed at the following council meeting. Before we move on, can I have a show of hands from those in the gallery who wish to ask a question today? Mr. Webber, thank you. Moving on to questions submitted in writing. Question 1 from Mr. James Judd. Is the charge by the Colac Otway Shire Council to those charged in the garbage collection area based on the actual cost of delivering this service to those charged, or is it inflated to include all costs run up to provide this service to places it cannot charge a customer? Response from General Manager, Infrastructure and Operations.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Judd, for the question. Councils can establish a waste management charge to recover the full cost of delivering the overall waste service. This can include curbside bins, public litter bins, transfer stations, education programs and more. For Colac Otway Shire Council, this full service is expected to cost $5.5 million in 22-23 year. Colac Otway Shire Council has a position of limiting the waste charge to just cover the cost of the curbside collection service and plans to raise $3.7 million in 23-24. We can confirm the waste levy is only levied on those properties who receive the curbside collection service. The majority of the difference in the waste charge income and the cost of the overall service is borne through general rate revenue. In the 23-24 budget, Council adopted a 10% increase in the waste charge to $351 for weekly collection and $268 for fortnightly collection.
Thank you. Question 2. Due to the agreement entered into between the Colac Otway Shire Council and the Victorian State Government on the supply of electric power, as the owner of the company to supply power under this agreement has a fully owned company, Snowy Hydro, just announced a very big delay of at least 7 years in a project to supply power and a very big high cost blowout of over 5-fold of about $10 billion. Will power under this contract now be certain it will be provided on time and at an affordable cost? Plus, will we continue to have street lights in this municipality that are able to operate? Response from General Manager, Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor. Council doesn't have an agreement or contract with the Victorian State Government relating to the supply of electric power.
Thank you. Question 3. Will the Colac Otway Shire Council do itself a favour and hurry up and advise under what the council election in 2025 will be conducted? Is this as per LGA 2020 that councillors must represent 1-member wards, or will you ignore this requirement because if single-member wards this shire will have to be re-subdivided into a number of wards, plus you will have to call for candidates to register very soon now, as the election must be held within about 14 months. As well, you'll have to produce updated electoral rolls and notify all if we change from whole of municipality to a ward-only basis. If wards, all must be advised of what ward they are in, as ward votes can only vote for those standing in that ward, not for all standing in the municipal area. Plus, if to be conducted by mail, you need to allow ample time to post of ballot material and have it returned prior to the cut-off date for return of ballots. It is well known that mail not redirected can take over 7 days from when mail postmarked and dated in Colac is delivered to Colac Post Office address, but if sent to wrong places, can then many weeks. Response from the Manager of Governance, please.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Mr Judd. The electoral structure of Colac Otway Shire Council was last reviewed in 2019. However, the commencement of the Local Government Act 2020 meant the electoral structure was determined in accordance with that Act. The municipality remains unsubdivided. While 39 councils are being reviewed in the state at the moment, this does not include Colac Otway Shire.
Thank you. Question 4. When will the Colac Otway Shire Council Rates Department send out rates notices so that people have a genuine amount of time to check them, plus if need be have arrangements to have funds available to pay them on time? Not delay sending out rate notices until only a month or less before the first payment is due. You cannot keep using the excuse you only have to give 2 weeks notice. In an area it can take over a week in Colac to deliver mail, even to a post office address in Colac that is not redirected. This allows no time for a person to mail back a payment and be certain they will not be hit with interest as payment late in being received. Council's mailing is a disgrace at times, many days from when mail is dated and the dispatch date recorded on an envelope, in addition to non-work days for years when the first payment fee due in September, rates notices were sent out in very early July. I'm not the only person objecting to this year's rate notices being very late. Response from General Manager, Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor. The Victorian Government recently introduced legislative changes that came into effect requiring additional information to be included on rates notices. This required Council to redesign its rate notices, and as a result, this year's rates notices were slightly later than usual. They were dated the 1st of September 2023, as this was the date they were mailed out to ratepayers. Late instalment payments are accepted up till the following February without interest being charged. In that time, ratepayers can contact Council and discuss their situation so we can assist with setting them up to pay by instalments or putting them onto payment plans. After February, if no contact has been made with Council, then yes, interest does start to be charged on amounts that remain outstanding. We'll always try to assist people to manage the payment of their rates within their circumstances. If a ratepayer is concerned with delays at Australia Post, they can register through Council's website to receive the notice via email straight away via e-notices, or again, contact the Rates Department and they can assist.
Thank you. Question 5. When is the Colac Otway Shire Council going to justify to the entire community why it increased rates and charges on pensioner rate recipients at a higher percentage to the general community? Do not forget the pensioner rebate has been frozen for a period of years forward. There was no change in the 2023-2024 year, i.e. total rates and council charges. Year 1, $1,053.30 general community, $800 pensioner rebate in full off council charges. Year 2, $1,153.30 general community. Year 2, $900 pensioner rebate in full off council charges. Percentage increase year 1 to year 2, general community just over 9.47%, rebate recipients is 12.5%. Even if we added $1,000 to the total rates and council charges, general community up about 4.86%, pensioner recipients up about 5.56%. No matter how high the valuation, the pension increase would still be higher percentage based on the same valuation. Response from General Manager, Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor. Rates are based on valuation regardless of the status of the owner of the property, and therefore pension rate recipients are subject to the same processes as all ratepayers. The rebate amount is set by the state government. The rebate rate remains the same for this financial year as it did for last financial year. Council has been advised that future rebates cap will increase by 2.5% per year.
Thank you. Question now from Jason Schramm. Question 1, what is the total site value of residential Colac ilmenite in 22-23, residential Colac ilmenite in 23-24? CIV value residential Colac ilmenite in 22-23, CIV value residential Colac ilmenite in 23-24. Total site values of rural residential lifestyle properties 22-23, total site values of rural residential lifestyle properties 23-24. CIV value rural residential lifestyle properties 22-23, CIV value rural residential lifestyle properties 23-24. Total site value residential balance of Shire 22-23, total site value residential balance of Shire 23-24. CIV value residential property balance of Shire 22-23, CIV value residential property balance of Shire 23-24. Response from General Manager, Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor, we'll need to take this question on notice and respond in writing as this information needs time to collate.
Thank you, yes. Question 2, with regard to the community consultation about the master plan for the Botanic Gardens, what area is Council talking about? It is very confusing at best. The media says have a say on the gardens and Lake Foreshore, but the survey does not mention the foreshore at all. There are no indicative maps or diagrams, nor are there any references to existing plans for these areas. Does it include the playground and barbecue area? And is the Council looking at changing the Lake Colac master plan that takes in the foreshore area? Response from General Manager, Infrastructure and Operations.
Through you, Mayor, the Colac Botanic Gardens master plan is to review the 2012 master plan and will have the same area. The master planning process will explore interface issues and opportunities with the surrounding environment and consider the Lake Colac Caravan Park and any future developments in the vicinity of the Botanic Gardens.
Thank you. Question from Pauline Rostos. Question 1. $8 million of federal and state government natural disaster funding grants were on the table till 10th of August this year. Such grants would support the development of COS bushfire prevention, projection and recovery plan or a COS climate change risk assessment. Did Council avail itself of the opportunity to apply for these grants? Response from General Manager, Infrastructure and Operations.
Through you, Mayor, Council has been involved in a number of successful projects through this funding program. The most recent application was to undertake a flood study of the Barham River, which we were unsuccessful. However, we are currently in discussions with the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority and the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action for this to be funded.
Thank you. That concludes the written questions. Before we proceed with questions from the gallery, can I remind everyone that question time is for questions only. It's not a forum for public debate or statements. And when asking a question, could you please state your full name for the minutes, please? Mr. Webber, you indicated you had a question.
Tony Webber, Otway Forum. My first question's on the rates collected in the Maringo, Apollo Bay and Skeens Creek area compared to the money spent in the same area.
Yeah, what's your question? Well, that is the question.
Question, yes.
Are you saying what is the comparison between money collected?
The amount spent and the amount collected.
I'm advised we'll have to take that on notice. We don't have that information to hand right now, Mr. Webber, but you will get a response.
Thank you. The second question is about people driving on the wrong side of the road along the Ocean Road. A person born in Apollo Bay and a tenant now in Apollo Bay was driving along the Ocean Road. A car proceeded towards him and it wouldn't go off onto its right lane. He had to run into the ditch. He turned round and followed the vehicle and caught up with it at a traffic light for roadworks. He got out and asked the person what they were doing and all as they could say was sorry. That's the only English they had. I think in New Zealand, when you travel there, if you don't speak English or you drive in a country on the other side of the road, you have to do a short video display so you understand the road rules. Maybe this council could actually lobby the state government to do something similar. Would the council do that?
Thanks, CEO.
Through the Chair, I'm happy to respond to that. Thanks, Mr Webber. This is an issue that our communities have raised for many, many years, and along with the other councils along the Great Ocean Road, we've been advocating for a long time to both levels of government, state and Commonwealth, to get some significant funding to help with signage, improved signage, and also some training for people as sometimes they might enter the country, pick up vehicles, etc. So rather than individual councils, we think it needs a broader approach. We were getting some really good traction with our partners many years ago, and I think we were optimistic something would happen, and then in 2020 we had a significant disruption that kind of stopped a lot of international travel, and I think that project got put on hold. So I take the opportunity that you're giving us to, re-energise our advocacy, because I think that's an important thing for us to do. I hope that's helped.
Thank you. The third question is about the debate on the sale of the old kindergarten. Now, the community would like the council to reconsider the decision to sell the old kindergarten site because of the change in circumstances. Will the council reconsider, please?
Well, yeah, I'd like to. Thanks for the question, Mr Webber. Councils will be considering matters in the agenda, as you know.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the gallery? Thank you. Councillors, I'll move on to petitions and joint letters. I note we have a petition with a total of 917 signatories received from the Apollo Bay Community Voice on the 13th September 2023 in response to the proposed sale of 69 McLaughlin Street, Apollo Bay. The purpose of the petition is to request that Council not sell 69 McLaughlin Street, Apollo Bay. In accordance with clause 5711 of Council's governance rules, if a petition relates to any item already on the agenda for the Council meeting at which the petition is submitted, the Chair may decide that the petition will be dealt with in conjunction with that agenda item. As Chair, I advise that the petition... Councillor Costin, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could jump in for a moment. It's a rapidly changing world in which we live at the moment. A number of things have happened since I lodged my rescission notice after our August meeting. If I could go on a bit and explain where I'm getting to, you'll see.
The floor's yours. Thank you, Councillor Costin.
Only a week ago, the Victorian Government released its housing statement with a series of reforms and investments, including some specifically for regional Victoria. The Australian Government also announced its National Housing and Homelessness Plan in August, and we're still understanding more about that program as it's to be rolled out. The scale and focus of these reforms and investments, proposed investments by these other levels of government are significant. They amount to billions of dollars, tens of millions, tens of billions. And they present the best opportunities for our community to see significant relief from our housing crisis. Last week, the Victorian Government announced a commitment to a further 50 houses in Colac Otway Shire, and this is a sign that our advocacy is making real traction. Council, its officers and our regional partners continue to be very active in discussions with Homes Victoria about achieving similar outcomes in Apollo Bay, where we also need various types of housing and quite a few of them as well. With all these announcements and information made available to me, and reading between the lines a bit, I guess I've got good reason to be confident that Apollo Bay will see some housing outcomes in the near future. And I no longer think that Council needs to hold up the sale of 69 McLaughlin Street at this time. So noting that the sale proceeds from the sale of 69 McLaughlin Street will go to pay outstanding invoices for the early years hub component, for the maternal and child health component of the early years hub, and that the remaining proceeds are still allocated as a contribution towards childcare at this early years hub. And if childcare goes in, it becomes a best practice integrated early years hub, so international best practice. So therefore, Mayor, I advise that, Mayor and councillors, I advise that I withdraw my rescission notice, item 10.1, and perhaps if you can let us know what now happens to that petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Costin, and very well explained to us all. In view of that, I'll revert to our practice and governance, in which case a petition received at one meeting will be carried over to be dealt with at the following council meeting. So in this event, we won't be dealing with the petition today, but we'll be dealing with it at the next council meeting, which will be in October. Thanks again, Councillor Costin. Councillors, are there any declarations of conflict of interest, please? I will declare a conflict in relation to item 9.5, contract 2401. It's a general conflict of interest, and I'll explain that further when we get to that item. Mr. Surin?
Through you, Mayor, I'd also like to declare a general conflict of interest for item 9.5, contract 2401 Memorial Square Public Toilets redevelopment. I've got family members employed by one of the tenderers.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thanks, councillors. Move on to the confirmation of the minutes. I'll propose that we move to confirm the minutes of the council meeting held on Wednesday, the 23rd of August 2023. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Is there a seconder? Councillor Finnegan, thank you. Is to be opposed? All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Carried 7-0. Councillors, we'll move to officers' reports. Item 9.1, approval and certification of in-principle financial statements and performance statements for 22-23. Purpose of this report is to present the 22-23 financial statements and performance statements to Council for in-principle approval as recommended by the Audit and Risk Committee and in accordance with Section 99 of the Local Government Act 2020. CEO.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to provide an update on this item, and then I'm going to ask that our Manager of Finance, Mr. Xavier Flanagan, be able to just draw to the gallery and council's attention, I think, some highlights from the statements themselves. Some housekeeping matters from me first. So the presentation of our end-of-year financial statements and performance statements is always a significant milestone. Lots of moving parts, you know, almost right to this point where council finally consider them. And I thank the finance team and every other officer involved in the preparation of this year's statements, and I also thank the Audit Risk Committee, who have worked closely with us throughout the process, asked insightful questions and given us good guidance, as well as good guidance, I think, to council tonight. A few things I need to draw to the attention of councillors and the gallery, though. The report in the agenda was drafted actually prior to the Audit and Risk Committee on the 13th of September, and it was drafted on the basis of the committee's agenda, and we failed to pick up some minor changes as a result of the committee's minutes, and so there are some things on page 6 and 7 that I need to correct now. Those corrections relate to the advice from the Audit and Risk Committee to Council. Item 2.2 in that advice, which is in the executive summary, as I said, on page 6, it should say, the last part of that point should say that if there are significant changes prior to certification of the 22-23 Colac Otway Shire Council financial statements and performance statement, that they be referred to the Audit and Risk Committee for endorsement. and so our report says information. The committee asks that they have an opportunity to endorse it. So it should say endorsement. And the third point in their advice to council that ends in the words made on behalf of council, and the committee asks that that advice actually say where changes have been made on behalf of council and have been endorsed by the auditor and audit and risk committee. Okay, so we will have those corrections noted in the minutes. They don't change the statements or the recommendation of officers, but we just wanted to make sure they correctly reflect the committee's minutes. We have, as I said, been working with our auditors closely right to the very last point, and through that process we have identified two corrections that have needed to be made to the performance statement. They are both relatively minor, and the auditors are very comfortable that there's nothing material or of concern, but we wanted to make sure that the statements are as absolutely as accurate as possible. So we have, as of today, prepared another version of the performance statements that has been provided to the councils already, and we table it tonight to be recorded as attachment 3. The two changes for the gallery's benefit that I will just speak to that have been made to those performance statement changes, they relate to the aquatic utilisation indicator, and in fact our visitation to our Blue Water Leisure Centre has actually been greater than what we initially reported in the statement, so that's a good thing, and we have corrected that indicator to now be 4.68, so that is an improved performance outcome. The second indicator that we've had to make a minor adjustment to is the diversion of waste from landfill, which is measured in tonnages. That was reported in the statements in the agenda as 56.68% diversion, and we've actually had a better outcome this year than that. So we have been able to adjust that up to 57.15. They're the only two changes in attachment 3 from what is in the agenda, and there are no changes to the financial statements. So with that, we have on the screen for councillors a revised recommendation just to acknowledge that we are tabling and recording an updated performance statement, and recommending that now these statements are ready for council's in principle endorsement. I also just want to confirm that we have received the closing report from the auditors. They've given us a good, clear report that's been provided to councillors before the meeting, and so it really is ready for councillors this evening. So with that, I will ask our Manager of Finance to maybe make some comments.
Thanks, CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. So I would like to echo Anne's sentiments around thanking all the officers that were involved in this report. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into these 46 pages. It might look like a lot of numbers on a page, a lot of exciting numbers on a page, but there's an enormous amount of efforts, and specifically the finance team, I think they've done a really good effort in bringing a true and fair depiction of where we sit, and I'm really proud of what they've done, and I think they should be as well. So that being said, I'm just going to briefly go through the chief's statements. So I'll draw your attention initially to the comprehensive income statement. That's page 4 on the statements. I think it's page 24 on the agenda. I'm not sure. So we're seeing at the conclusion of this financial year a surplus of 6.56 mil. This is around 812k favourable to prior year, and around about 6.09 mil favourable to budget bottom line. So our year-on-year movement is driven in the most part by a 2.4 million sale of property movement, which is in a favourable sense, mainly down to the Bruce Street sale. We see around about 800, a little bit over 800k uptick in user fees and in rates and charges. So user fees, I dare say, probably returning to almost to pre-COVID levels, and rates and charges as per increase in rate cap. These are offset by, we also see around about $500,000 year-on-year improvement in operating grants. These are offset by around about a $2.8 million increase in depreciation year-on-year, and I'll expand on that a little bit further when we talk to the balance sheet. And we also see around about a 2.5 million increase in employee costs. These are offset by improvements year on year in materials and services, so consultants, agency staff, contract payments are reducing. So that's sort of the drivers of our really favourable result, around about the 6.5 million surplus improvement year on year. From a balance sheet perspective, which is page 5 of the statements, I think page 25 of the agenda, our assets have increased by almost $50 million. That year-on-year movement is driven in the most part by asset revaluations in our property, infrastructure, plant and equipment. Those revaluations are kind of done in two parts. They're done on various asset categories throughout that year, not all, but there's a 4-year rolling cycle on each of the asset categories. And this year, like every time there's a reval, there's a focus on the cost of the replacement assessment and the condition assessment. So when that assessment is done and we look at, well, the cost of replacing this asset has increased, and also, well, the condition of this asset's a little bit better than we thought it would be, that means the asset value increases, and therefore, by virtue of that, our depreciation over the life of that asset needs to increase also. That's why you're seeing those increases in depreciation there. We also see we've spent around about 10.3 mil on capital costs, so that sort of adds to that asset increase as well. From a balance sheet perspective, in addition to that, we'll see a 7.6 million increase in cash and cash equivalents, which is a positive note, and additional 1 million improvement in term deposits that we're holding in term deposits. I'd also draw your attention to the balance sheet that we have 0 borrowings. So we've paid off all our borrowings for that period. Looking at the statement of cash flows on page 7, I think page 27 of the agenda, our cash position's improved year on year by around about 7.26 mil. This is driven in most part by, as I previously mentioned, the Bruce Street sale, which is around about 2.6 mil. A year-on-year reduction in our capital works expenditure, around about 2.4 mil, and around about a 5 million improvement in, or a 5 million favourable directional result in payments to investments. This is offset by our opening balance in cash was 2.15 mil less than last year. So even though we started our cash lower than last year, we still have a cash position that's improved more so than that to give us a 7.26 million year-on-year improvement in our cash line. I submit this report, Mayor, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, and appreciate that summary you've given us. Thank you very much. Are there questions for officers? Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor. Xavier, can you explain to us, and thank you for your commentary, that was very instructive, the position of the, well, I'm trying to look at the table here, the adjusted underlying result, in other words, their capacity to meet our liabilities with their own revenue. Can you just speak to that for a moment, please?
So to just, through the Mayor. So within the report, I'm not sure what page you're on, but adjusted underlying result.
It was just as in the what was provided to councillors in the agenda.
So to speak to that measure is not our ability to meet our liabilities, but it's more in layman's terms, do we have the funds to stand on our own 2 feet? So in effect, what the adjusted underlying result does is says, okay, what's our surplus? And if we take from our income lines, non-recurrent grants and cash contributions, where do we sit? So in other words, do we have sufficient funds to finance these services that we provide? Yep.
And the table that you provided suggests that whilst we do, it's still relatively close. Is that fair to say?
Hang on, let me just...
At 1.9%?
Sorry, through the Mayor, I just want to answer the question properly.
I'm sorry, Xavier, if I've put you on the spot.
Yeah. So to assist our Manager of Finance, it's actually in the officer's report, I think, that the council's referring to, not the statements.
Thank you, Ian. So our adjusted underlying result at the moment is 1.9%. So that puts us within sort of the medium risk level at the moment.
Yeah, so we're able to do what you suggest that we can do. We're okay, but we could be a little bit better. It would be nice if we could. We just need to watch what we spend, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the summary we got a short while ago. My question relates to carryover projects and the figures on 41, and I'm particularly interested in the funds from council money as distinct from the grants. So the carry forward projects on page 41 that says 3.6 million, does that represent all the carry forward projects from the perspective of council's contribution? And I know there's more commentary on this on item 9.3 later in the agenda. Or if not, what is the carry forward amount from council funds and how does that compare to last year? If it's the figures on 41, then that makes it easy. Page 41 of the agenda, then that makes it easy, which is page 21 of the report.
So you're in Councillor Hart, note 9.1, is that right?
Yeah, I'm on 9.1 and I'm on page 41 of the council agenda, which is page 21 of the financial report, which is note 5.1 regarding financial assets, and it refers to carry forward works committed 3.623 million. I'm just trying to understand whether that's the full extent of carry forward projects or not in terms of council's contribution.
I believe it's the capital portion. I think we also have operating carry forwards on operating projects also.
So where could I find those figures, please? Or do I have to go to 9.3? Because there was no total for 9.3. So agenda item 9.3 also has a lot of detail on this, but I can't see a total figure. So I'm trying to have some perspective as to what projects are being carried forward so that can be compared to the previous financial year. I'm trying to have some understanding. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
Yeah. And I'll take that on notice and give you a comprehensive answer there.
You turn yourself off.
Thank you. Through the chair. Just to assist, recognising that our Manager of Finance actually wasn't here last year, and so the carry forward is less than last year, okay? The carry forward in the reserve in note 9.1 is just council's contribution to projects that need to be carried forward, and so when you look at if you're looking for a feel for the total of the scale of the carry forward program to understand, perhaps performance, etc., significantly less. But our unearned income this year, which is not included in the reserve balance, okay, is also less. So the total carry forward in capital and operating projects is less. And one of the large changes to that is at this time last year, we were still carrying forward a $15 million or $16 million city deal program that would have been coming through the carry forwards. That's no longer in so our operational projects are significantly less, even though they were materially, fully funded by a grant. So they didn't change the reserve, Councillor Hart, but they had a big role in the overall program. The capital program is also less. Okay? So I hope that's answered. Both programs have a lower carry forward. The operating primarily because of city deals. The capital is also slightly less this year.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hanson.
I'm not sure what page this is on, but we do list the planning matters that have gone to VCAT, and I think this year we had one planning matter that was overturned, and Mr McNeil might know this, but I just wondered, is that what's listed in the report? Is it planning matters that are overturned based on the officer decision, or is it council's decision? I just wasn't sure when I read it. I should have written the page, but I forgot.
Through you, Mayor, Mr McNeil just informs me that it's council's decision.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. In the comprehensive income statement, our rates and charges revenue hasn't gone up very much at all, but our employee costs have increased quite substantially. Is that reflect an increase in numbers, or is there some other blip in there that's causing that number to have increased so much?
So our rates obviously go up by the rate cap, so that's driven by that number. From an employee expense viewpoint, we did fill a lot of vacancies, so that's driving part of that, and also there's pay rises implicit in that as well. So that's what's driving most of that increase.
I don't have the note number through the chair, but if councillors look and the committee look to the difference in the 2 financial years on agency costs, which are effectively where we have vacancies, we fill them with contracted agency staff and consultants and contractors overall. They are materially down, and that's a large offset in play with the employee benefits costs.
Thanks, CEO. Councillor Hart.
Yeah, well, just on that, Mayor, and I think the information that the CEO is referring to might be on page 39 of the agenda. Isn't it a bit more to the story than that, in that if you look at page 39 of the agenda, employee costs have gone up from 21.9 million, hang on, these numbers are pretty, basically 22 million to 24.46, but as the CEO's, to put some numbers to what the CEO is saying, agency staff has gone down from 2.3 million to 1.56, and consultants have gone down from 2.7 million to 1 million. Isn't that give a bit more
Thank you. They are the material
meat on the
offsets.
bones into what's going on with employees?
Sorry?
I just wondered if that gave a bit more meat on the bones on the issue, in that if you look, almost need to look at those 3 figures together, I would have thought.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. I didn't have the numbers handy, but I knew that that is the material offset to employee benefits. As Mr Flanagan said, we've been successful filling some vacancies, and so we're paying employees rather than contracted and agency staff.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillors, we have a revised officer recommendation with a report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move the motion? Councillor Arnott?
I'd like to move that the revised officer's recommendation be accepted, please.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Seconder, Councillor White. Is it to be opposed? Thanks, Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my pleasure to actually move this motion. I think it's actually a great effort by council, and whilst I won't accept significant credit for this because I've only been in council since March, so this is the work of prior councillors and executive to get to this point. And so it's been quite good to see that we have a surplus for the year. I'm also quite pleased to have had the opportunity to sit down with Xavier, our new finance manager, earlier this week, and for him to explain to me in some detail about the reports and what it means. So I thank him for that. So that gives me confidence to be able to move this motion. So, and I'd like to reinforce that employees are our greatest assets in delivery of our services to the community. Yes, there has been an increase in employment costs, but this has been offset by other things such as agency costs and whatever. And Councillor Hart did give you some commentary in respect to that. So again, I reinforce that from my perspective, our employees will always be our greatest asset. There have been some minor changes, as has been pointed out by our CEO, Anne. In respect to the report, none of them are material. The auditors have found that the report is very concise and accurate. And so nevertheless, those alterations have been included to make sure that we have a very complete and clear report to provide our community, that they have complete confidence of its accuracy. So it's in that context that I support this. And I'd also like to acknowledge that, of course, that Council has paid its debt in full, which I would have thought that Councillor Hart might have been dancing on the table to acknowledge, but that'll be up to him. He might give some commentary on that because he's been party to seeing that through. So, and we continue to to address our reserve position to make sure that we have the financial capacity to meet our liabilities in the future. I would not want anyone to think that a $6 million surplus means we have $6 million to chuck away. We do not. We have liabilities we must meet with that. Also, we must meet liabilities with the other cash that is reported in our bank. So it is reassuring that, in fact, we are in a position to meet all those requirements. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Councillor White, did you wish to speak?
I think Councillor Arnott's covered it pretty comprehensively. He's highlighted a number of things I was going to highlight, but I'd also like to endorse and thank Anne for her comments and clarification and the further information that she's brought to the table, and to the team for their hard work. It really is an enormous amount of work to get all the information to the auditors for sign-off, so thank you to Xavier, and also for your summary, Xavier, putting it in layman's terms, and often financial conversations can get a bit bamboozling for those that aren't in that space all the time. So thank you for that. And yeah, I guess also just to highlight again that although it looks like there's been a big increase in employee costs, that is offset by the decrease in consultants and agency costs, and we need to be mindful that one thing offsets the other. And so, yeah, I'd like to congratulate the team on their work and second the motion.
Thanks, Councillor White. Any other councillor? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, I just will also note that these financials have been independently audited on behalf of the Victorian Auditor General's Office. It's always also been through our Audit and Risk Committee, of which Councillor White and I are our councillor members. I'll also just note that it has already been said that, you know, some key challenges remain, and the biggest one being that the cost of delivering council services continues to exceed the Shire's capacity to generate revenue. So that is a continuing challenge for the Shire. But I also will note, on a positive note, and thank the work of officers in preparing these reports, that the Audit and Risk Committee did note that it's been a much smoother run in getting these reports prepared this year, and compared to previous years for lots of different reasons, and possibly due to improved processes, that it has been a smoother process to get these reports finalised, and the Audit and Risk Committee, look forward to it, to even being more timely and smoother next year again. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Any other councillor? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you to the officers who have prepared these comprehensive reports. In one sense, what we're essentially doing here is saying that these reports are accurate and should be signed, and obviously I'm happy to do that. But I don't think it gives the full picture of some of the details that's in that report. As I think some of the other councillors may have mentioned, is there's a high cash balance, but some of that reflects federal grants that have been received in advance and will have to pay the costs for next year. And there's several reserves, including money for various capital projects that haven't been completed, that all that money is accounted for. It doesn't mean that there's a large amount of money that's just free and available to be spent. Some of it is to just give one example, is to rehabilitate the cost of rehabilitation of the LV transfer station, and I think it's some foresight in council that money's been recognised for that cost over many years, so that when eventually that has to be committed, that there's money there to do that work. So I just want to make it clear that there's not, when council's not rolling around in money. On the debt side, it is fantastic to see that the council's debt's finally been repaid. While in a legal sense council's repaid that debt, it's actually ratepayers who have repaid that debt over many years. And I know there's a temptation that, oh, well, the debt's repaid, why don't we go and spend the money on something else and borrow some more money. But when you do that, you need to be able to service the debt, and the returns that council typically gets from projects, quite rightly council does projects that provide a social benefit to the community, that doesn't provide the finances typically to repay debt. So we have to be very cautious about taking on more council debt. And when you look at the carry forward projects, while it does appear that there's been some improvements compared to last year, we do have projects carried forward, and I know we have that every year. It would perhaps be helpful to have a clear figure on that. I know there's more information on item 9.3, but I couldn't see an easy total on that figure. When you have capacity constraints of completing projects that we already fund, it doesn't make sense to me that you would go and borrow more money to fund another project that you may have difficulty repaying, and you may even have difficulty completion. The issue here, to some extent, is completing some of the projects that we've already funded, rather than not having enough work for council to do. So I thank the council officers who have prepared this report. I just note an area of caution, both in terms of how the cash balance is interpreted and the temptation that some seem to have to get back into debt. It's quite something we should value highly, and there's other municipalities not far from here who have had difficulty because they've just constantly gone into debt and then hit their ceiling.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried 7-0. Item 9.2, 710 Blue Johanna Road, Johanna. Purpose of this report is to seek direction from Council about amended plans for the use and development of 4 group accommodation buildings and a caretaker's house at 710 Blue Johanna Road in Johanna. The amended plans have been prepared to try to address concerns raised by an objector who has lodged an appeal at VCAT. Do councillors have questions of officers? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just flagged that when we get ready for it, I've got an alternative that just adds a little bit of extra detail.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Finning had a question.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've just got a few questions. I'd just like to ask, can you just give a little explanation as to why we're in this situation now, with sort of why this matter's been brought before council, just for those in the room?
Through you, Mayor. You'll recall, councillors, that back in February you considered a matter relating to group accommodation and a caretaker's house down at this site, and resolved against officer recommendation to issue a notice of decision to grant a permit for that proposal. That matter has since been taken to VCAT by an objector to the proposal, and council is party to that VCAT proceeding. So council is no longer a decision maker in this matter. It is party to a VCAT hearing. The permit applicant has recently, in the last week or so, requested that the plans considered by councillors in February be substituted by amended plans, which is a process that can be done. There's a practice note actually that governs how that is done, which is called PNP 9, and that sets out requirements of permit applicants if they're seeking to make such a request, and it also sets out other matters like what other parties to the appeal have to do and what notice requirements there may be related to the matter. Given that the decision was taken by councillors against officer recommendation. We consider it quite important that councillors are involved in any future decision made on amending the proposal, which is why we've brought this matter to you. The amendments don't in any way alter officers' consideration of the merits of the proposal, but nor does our recommendation in any way comment on the merits of the proposed amendments. What we have done is we've had a look at that practice note, which, as I say, sets out what people have to do, all parties, permit applicant and other parties, have to do when requesting to amend plans at VCAT. The site in question is in an area of bushfire risk, it's in an area of landslip risk, and the detail we've received to date basically comprises 4 landscape and site plans that just show the proposed locations, revised locations of the group accommodation units and the other building. So from officers' perspective, we don't think that what has been supplied to date meets the requirements of the practice note. As I say, this isn't commenting on the merits of whether the amendment may ultimately be acceptable or not. We just don't think that there's sufficient information in front of councillors to be able to make a judgment on whether the proposal is acceptable in terms of its visual impact of the new sightings, in terms of bushfire, in terms of landslip and a few other matters. So we don't think the amended plans meet the requirements of the practice note. And that's the reason for the recommendation in front of you, if there are any other questions.
Councillor Finnegan, a follow up, and then Councillor Costin.
I was going to say I've got a few more. I'm more than happy for Councillor Costin to go first, and then I can follow up if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, if you like. Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. If we adopt this recommendation today and the applicant submits the documents that we require to comply with the practice note tomorrow or later this week or early next week, what will happen? Where do we sit if those documents are submitted tomorrow or later in the week or next week?
Through you, Mayor, any documents would have to be submitted through VCAT and would have to accord again with VCAT processes. As I say, VCAT is the decision maker, so it would make the decision on whether to circulate that and invite, again, parties to the appeal to make representations, as is the current situation. Should we receive the additional documentation and plans through a VCAT approved process, then obviously we'd bring those back to you for consideration of the substitution and for your views on the acceptability of the proposed amendments.
Thank you. Just one follow-up. Sorry, Councillor Finnegan. Is there any risk or downside of deferring this decision until our planning committee meeting in 2 weeks' time?
Through you, Mayor, my understanding is that we have to provide feedback or requested to provide feedback no later than the 12th of October. We have engaged a consultant to actually represent council in this matter. So it would be dependent, obviously, on their capacity to prepare a submission as well. They have requested, if possible, to have advice on council's position by the 9th of October, given other VCAT commitments they have.
So you're effectively saying that we have to make this decision today?
Through you, Mayor, I'm not saying, I'm just giving you the timelines that are currently there. As I say, the consultant has requested, if possible, to get the information by the 9th so it can be presented to VCAT by the 12th, which is the date set in the PNP 9 form.
And just remind me the VCAT hearing date.
Through you, Mayor, it's currently set for 3 days, the 30th and 31st of October and the 1st of November.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gosling. Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned earlier that we're not the decision makers in this matter, and that's VCAT. But are we not, as a council, being asked to make a decision on whether or not to consent to substituting the plans as part of this agenda item?
Through you, Mayor, it's not a decision per se. What's being sought through the VCAT process is a position of each party on the amended plans that VCAT will consider at the commencement of the actual hearing. So the decision on whether it's substituted will be made by the tribunal, notwithstanding any comments we provide back to them.
But we are being asked to come to a decision around whether or not we would consent in our position on that. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we are seeking councillor advice on the feedback to VCAT.
Thank you. And when were the amended plans provided to council?
Through you, Mayor, they were provided on Friday the 14th of September.
Thank you very much. And knowing that you'd be recommending that we don't have the information required to make, to sort of consent one way or the other until the information's provided, why didn't we seek the information or go back to the applicants and request that they provide that information to VCAT so it could be provided to us in a more timely manner before this evening's meeting?
Through you, Mayor, as mentioned already, this is a VCAT proceeding, and the practice note makes very explicit what is expected of the various parties at various stages. The information came in with specific reference to PNP2, so the applicant's consultant is fully aware of the requirements and submitted on that basis. We went through the information at the start of the week after it was received, so the Monday, Tuesday after it was received, and also liaised with our VCAT consultant who's representing council, who went through all the plans and identified the level of information that was lacking. So there were initial discussions around that. We then are going through the process advised in the practice note, where it basically says we can do nothing. On a request to amend the plans, we can amend our statement or we can object, giving reasons. That practice note in no way says council should be advising on the level of information provided under the practice note. As I say, the consultants for the applicant would be well aware and actually made the submission with direct reference to PNP2.
And why didn't we query that information wasn't included when we had it, when we received it? You know, there's been 2 weeks in which it could have been provided and we could have this information before tonight's meeting.
Through you, Mayor, what we received basically was 4 site plans or landscape plans with the rectangles depicting the proposed accommodation units just moved on the plan. There is such non-compliance with the practice note requirements. There are no elevations, there's no supporting material, none of the required changes such as changes to setbacks, etc. have been depicted. So there's a substantial amount of information that wasn't provided. It was very, very basic what was provided. And council had actually flagged to the applicant some months previously that if they did want to amend the plans, that we would have expectations around the information that came in, including supporting documentation. As I say, we're now actually in a set VCAT process. So what we're doing at this point is actually responding in the way the practice note actually requires us to do.
Thank you. And you said that there was some informal talks earlier on, but would it not have made sense that when the information came in and it didn't have what you thought you needed, would it not have made sense to go back again to the applicant and say, hey, we haven't got this information, this is something we think councillors may need to make a call on this matter?
Through you, Mayor, the flagging of the information council would make was done outside the VCAT process. It wasn't, at that point, something that VCAT was directly involved in. We're now directly in the VCAT process with VCAT as the decision maker and us being just invited for comments on what we have been provided with by the applicant.
Thank you. And the final one is, and just touching on this to make sure, so if the amended plans are provided before the VCAT hearing date, the deadline set for VCAT, can you guarantee we'll be able to view and vote on whether or not to consent to substitution before the matter goes to VCAT?
Through you, Mayor, in the event that we receive something from VCAT asking for our views on substitution of different documentation or additional documentation, our recommendation suggests that part of it is agreement to review the amended plans if and when that information is received. As I say, it would have to come to us through the VCAT process with VCAT asking us for the views on that. But should that be received, yes, absolutely, we would review it, and we would also come back to councillors for their advice on the acceptability of substituting the plans and the acceptability of the proposed amendments.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Costin.
Thank you. On page 89 of our agenda, there's an option 2, which is to advise VCAT that the substitution of amended plans is conditionally agreed, subject to provision of documentation at a later date. And I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that means before we would issue a permit. Is that right?
Through you, Mayor, obviously anything would have to be before a permit was issued. That isn't the preferred option of officers, because at this point we have no idea really of the implications of the changes because of the lack of information. But certainly that option would certainly have to be prior to any issue of a permit. These matters are fundamental. Some of them are related to the prioritisation of life with bushfire and landslip. So, as I say, that's not the option put forward by officers, but it would be prior to a permit.
Yeah, so we would still have control and make sure all those conditions were met before we would issue a permit. Is that right?
Through you, Mayor, as I say, the tribunal is the decision maker. We would only be putting forward an option to the tribunal in terms of council's position.
Thank you. Mayor, I'd like to move an alternate motion, which is the wording of option 2 underlined on page 89.
Thanks, Councillor Costin. Councillor Hart has flagged an alternative. Should that not be successful,
I think he flagged an amendment.
Yeah, well, Councillor Hart's got in first, in my view, and I'll be taking that. Councillor Hart, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My question was related to public notice. Does the public get notified of this change in plans? What's the process there? Because I'm aware of at least one other objector who's not still involved with the VCAT matter, but possibly may have a view on the different location, and perhaps other landholders who are happy enough with what was proposed may have a view on the new location. So how does that work?
Through you, Mayor, and that's a very valid point, because obviously by moving buildings you can get closer to other properties or dwellings. So the practice note again sets out the notice requirements. So it's very specific. It places the obligation to undertake notice on the permit applicant. They're required to notify people previously notified of the application. They also are required to check with council whether any updated details are available and that the contact details, etc., they have are correct. So they have already contacted council for that information.
Any other questions?
No, when you're ready, I'm happy to move my alternative, which is very similar. Are you happy for
I was about to invite you to do that, Councillor Hart.
It's basically the officer recommendation, but it has an extra point. At point 5, it says the council will take all reasonable steps to bring the item to the planning committee meeting on 11th of October if the information referred to in point 4 is provided through the VCAT process with sufficient time. And point 6 is simply the officer recommendation 5 becomes 6 because I've put an extra point 5 in. So in short, that is just making it clear that we expect, if this is passed, that the information comes to the planning committee meeting on the 11th of October if the information's available.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Arnott, is it to be opposed? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. This particular matter has been pointed out is now before VCAT. One of the people involved has taken it to VCAT, and so in a sense, Colac Otway Shire Council is just a party to the process rather than the decision maker in the process. I think when we need to go back and consider a little bit about this application and how we got here. This particular property is very significant in terms of the landscape. It's in a rural conservation zone. It has a significant landscape overlay, and there's documents in the planning scheme that identify the importance of the site and the area more generally around the Johanna area. In addition, we had a submission at the February planning meeting that reminded us that 90% of visitors to the area are attracted by the natural environment. They're not my figures, but those of the tourism organisation of which council's a member. So when this matter was discussed, there was various questions about the accommodation units. There was a question as to whether perhaps they could be moved a bit further down the hill to reduce the significant visual impact of up to 9 metres high on stilts. And now the plans to move some of the structures further up the hill and closer to the ridgeline. So the issue now is that I think we need the information requested in point or mentioned in point 3, particularly around the visual impact. While there's been talk that this is a matter between the objector and the applicant, I don't agree that that's the complete story. Someone has to represent the people who come to the area and see this as the visual impact of the area, the natural environment, as an important issue. Again, it's a rural conservation zone with a significant landscape overlay. Someone has to represent the wider community interest in that, which is both neighbours and also people who are visitors to this area. So I think we need that visual impact as well as those other documents to form any sort of opinion on this revised plan. The point I've added is just to make it crystal clear that if there's enough time and this information comes through the VCAT process, that it is brought to the 11th of October planning meeting, notwithstanding the comments that it would be more convenient if it was ready by the 9th. Well, sometimes you just got to work with what you've got to work with. So I think this is the right way to proceed with this matter, and it also gives an opportunity for those particular documents to be submitted through the VCAT process.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor. Whilst I've not been party to the original motion in respect to this application, I have been privileged to be taken in now in confidence with the process. And it's that process which I'm keen to see through here. and that's why I support this motion put forward by Councillor Hart. And with that amendment, which clarifies step 4, which we agree to review the amended plans if and when information required by the practice note as provided. And so step 5 just makes it very, very clear that yes, we are open to do that, and that it provides at least some assistance for the applicant to say, well, get the damn stuff in, please. And we'll make that decision, because at the moment I don't believe that we do have the sufficient information to make an appropriate decision. And that requirement was previously advised to the applicant. The applicant has advisors that work with them who should be aware of that and should be able to provide the information required to council. So I guess it's within all that, and the fact that, well, it sits with VCAT, there's nothing about this motion which stops VCAT from making any decision that they see fit based on the information that they have in front of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be supporting this alternative or revised motion. I'm not sure exactly on the wording. This motion, I should say, from Councillor Hart and seconded by Councillor Arnott. I do believe it's a path forward. I believe it gives the applicants an opportunity to provide that information so that we as councillors can do what we're required to do and have the information in front of us before we make a call. That being said, I will stress that I do find it odd that our planning officers didn't seek to respond back and further request that information when it didn't come through, when they knew that they'd made that request previously in informal discussions. Notwithstanding that though, I see this as a path forward, and then once I'm sure that the applicants will work to provide this further information, and then we as councillors can make a call on whether or not to consent to the substitution of plans.
Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank Councillor Hart for putting that amended motion up. I had thought about moving a procedural motion just to defer debate on this matter until the 11th of October meeting anyway, but this almost achieves the same thing. Like Councillor Finnegan, I'm quite concerned that the applicant didn't know this was recommendation was being tabled on our agenda today. That concerns me. I think if we are trying to work with applicants to achieve something which council has previously approved, that we should take all steps to keep the applicants informed of what we're thinking at that time. There seems to be a lack of communication here, but I will support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Now move on to item 9.3, project budget adjustment and cash reserve transfers final 2022-23 report. Purpose of this report is to present to council the details of the project budget adjustments made as part of the end of financial year processes for 2022-23. The format for this report is based on council's monthly project budget adjustments and cash reserve transfers report. However, adjustments are presented for ratification as they have already been incorporated into the audited financial statements for 2022-23. Councillors, do we have any questions for officers? No questions. The officers have provided a recommendation with the report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this? Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Is there a seconder? Thanks, Councillor White. Is to be opposed? Councillor Arnott, did you wish to talk to it?
Thank you, Mayor. This is pretty much a procedural motion in context, but I just wanted to make sure that the public understands that this, from my understanding and process, is quite a significant improvement on where we've been. It does bring out into the open exactly what's happening inside council so that everyone understands what's happening with their money. Some of this cash is money we're talking about is actually carryover for projects and or money saved from projects. So this sort of assists in the whole process of resetting each year. It's good. We basically finish off last year, we close it, goes down to zero, if you like. We start off the new year zero, and then we add these things in and then go forward with that as a budget process. So it's in that sort of context that this is put forward as a process and information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Just to say that anything like this is really helpful in us understanding how budgets are developed and what's going forward. And it's very reassuring, and it brings a transparency in relation to that. So I'd like to say thank you and endorse the recommendation.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Hart.
I'm going to echo those comments from the other councillors, because this is a significant improvement in openness and transparency in the last couple of years, where these changes, where a project's come in perhaps a little bit under, and then another one might have needed some extra funds, the moving of those funds. And it reminds me, and it has its roots, Mayor, I don't know if I've ever told you about the Birregurra toilet block.
I don't think you have, but tell us.
So many years ago, there was funding in a budget to upgrade the public toilet block in Birregurra. And then 18 months later, see, the project was deferred because the sewage was being connected. 18 months later, I picked up in a new budget, I said, hang on a minute, there's funding for the Birregurra toilet block. And they said, oh yes, well, we had to wait until the sewage was connected. And I said, that's fine. What happened to the money that we put in the budget 2 years ago for this same project? Why can't we just use that money? And the short answer was, no one was quite sure. So this process is very important, and I really commend the CEO and other officers involved in this, that you can see if there's a project that's not going ahead, you can see, well, what happened to that money? Or if there's a project that comes under, you can see what's happened to that money. And conversely, if a project needs to have a bit more money, you can see that happening. So it's a really worthwhile report. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Anybody else? Councillors, I'll put the motion to vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Item 9.4, project budget adjustments and cash reserve transfers September 2023. Purpose of this report is to present the project budget adjustments and cash reserves transfers for council ratification and approval. These budgets are for 2023-24 capital works and operational projects. To councillor for questions of officers. Councillor Hart.
Can we just have some... I'm mindful you've declared a conflict in 9.5, so I want to be careful how I ask this question. But I'd like some clarity and some as to why some extra funds are required for that project. There's a figure on page 218 on the agenda. Given that I'm just asking a question on the project rather than who does it, I don't think that should give you any trouble. But can someone give me some clarity as to what that money's for, please?
Yeah, I feel that I'm okay, and Marlo's not glaring at me. So, yeah, can someone answer that, if possible?
Through you, Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor. The request for project budget increase through this report relates to a provision of project contingency. So all matters relating to the project are currently within the allocated budget that Council has set for it. However, the contingency amount that is available within the existing budget is on the light side, if you like. So the request is solely to provide contingency, and any money that's unspent will go back through this report once the project's completed and return to unallocated if we don't require the contingency amount.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillors' officers have provided a recommendation with a report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion? Councillor Hart, thank you. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Finnegan, is it be opposed? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. In a sense, this is sort of an extension of the previous item in that we're now allocating some unallocated funds for two projects, the Memorial Square toilet redevelopment and the Colac Aerodrome lighting, to ensure that those particular projects will have sufficient funding. So it's a continuation of that transparent process of unders and overs, if you like.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't take up too much time other than to echo Councillor Hart's comments and just say, you know, it's very good that we are transparent in these matters. So,
thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to endorse the comments by Councillor Hart and Finnegan's, and also to point out that we do need contingency funds for larger projects like the Memorial Square toilet redevelopment. It's a significant project, and it's not until you get to this stage of detailed design of construction and actual on-site that sometimes you realise what we thought was going to work is not going to, so we have to make a change here, and that will require a variation in the contract and or result. So you need that sort of contingency built in there to make sure you can handle that in an appropriate manner. So that's fine. The other one is the Colac Aerodrome lighting. That was to actually make that project a bit better, hopefully make it a bit more than what was originally designed to get a better outcome for the community. So I endorse the program and Councillor Hart's comments to say, well, this is a continuation of what we've just done.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Councillors, the next item is item 9.5, contract 2401. Councillors, declaration of conflict of interest from Mr. Surin and a declaration of conflict of interest by myself in that it's a general conflict of interest, but a relative of mine is involved in one of the companies that tendered for this contract. So I will vacate the chair, Mr. Surin.
Through you, Mayor, again, just like to declare a general conflict of interest for this item. I've got family members that are employed by one of the tenderers.
Thank you. That being the case, councillors will need to elect a chair to take my spot for the discussion of this matter. Councillor Finnegan, you raising your hand?
I'd like to nominate Councillor White.
Sure, Councillor. Yeah, seconded by Councillor Costin. Councillor White, you accept that role?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Any other, all councillors in favour of that? Thank you. I'll leave the room. Thanks, Councillor White.
Thank you for your support and endorsement for me taking the chair. So back to item 9.5, which is the contract for contract number 2401, Memorial Square Public Toilets Redevelopment. Are there any questions for officers? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Acting Chair. My question relates to a provision in the recommendation, which if I can find the right page, which says on point 4 that we authorise the General Manager of Community and Economy as a superintendent for the contract for variations. What is the dollar limit of variations that could be approved without having come back to council if this a resolution was approved like that?
Through the Chair, I'm happy to respond to that one. Councillor Hart, Council has a procurement policy that actually does put framework around variation approvals. An approval, a single variation approval, up to my delegation I can approve as the CEO. And we also track cumulative approvals on contracts, and when they're greater than 30%, we report those to the Audit and Risk Committee, and we would do that with an explanation as to why.
Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Acting Chair. What I'm trying to understand, it's all very well to report it. My question is, how much extra could be spent on this contract without requiring approval of council? So it's all very well that you tell us that it's happened, that's one thing. I'm trying to understand what is the dollar limit. Is it that 30%, so approximately $330,000, $350,000 on this particular contract? Is that what the dollar figure is that could be spent extra without having to get council approval?
Yep, so through the Chair, the procurement policy doesn't require council to approve cumulative variations greater than 30%. It requires us to report them to the committee, to the Audit and Risk Committee, which would then be reported in effect through to council.
Councillor Hart.
I'm happy to ask if the other councillors have a different view.
I'm trying to get a figure here. Am I to take it that the answer is there is no limit?
There's
no dollar limit.
There are limitations on the dollar limit for variations. I can't approve a variation beyond $300,000, including GST. Yep.
Thank you. So the number's $300,000.
I can't approve a single variation beyond $300,000. The wording in the policy says any variation, right, greater than up to $300,000 can be approved by the Chief Executive. That's what it says.
I think Councillor Arnott.
I haven't come across a variation
come back to you,
above
Councillor
that,
Hart.
so we haven't had to deal with it under the policy.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you. I do defer to Councillor Hart sometimes with the experience on this, and I accept that. But thank you for that feedback. My understanding is that we've just approved a contingency fund of $100,000. I'd imagine that would be the limit in this case. If before that you would come back to council with an advice to say we need greater contingency funds. Would that be a reasonable statement?
So we proactively manage our projects, okay? And so we would be managing this, and the project manager will be regularly reporting every adjustment to the contract costs and to the overall project costs, reporting it through to the project control group, executive, and here proactively, because our commitment is to try and always address any budget issue before we actually breach our budget, okay? So we will monitor the variations, and if we think that we are at risk of exceeding the $100,000 contingency, round number, $100,000 contingency available, then I would expect that we will be coming when we think we've got $50,000, $60,000 expended and we've got a discussion we need to have, seek councillors to have a discussion, understand the contract. So yes, because we actually have relatively low contingency, we would be here well before we get to the $300,000.
Yes, that would be my understanding. Thank you.
Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. On page 223, the financial management of this project, I think there's an incorrect figure there. It looks like you've got 13.5 million or so for the project. I assume that's 1.35 million. Does the 60,000 we just allocated as a from one fund to the next add to this? Does that make that 1.41?
Through you, Acting Chair, that's correct. Councillor, the total budget, that is a typo in the report. Apologies, I got a bit excited with zeros. However, it would adjust to the project budget, so the total budget, to 1.41 mil.
1.41. So I can't do the sums quickly in my head, but the delegation that the superintendent has could effectively go from the contract, the lump sum contract price, right up to that total budget without coming to council?
Through you, Acting Chair, the simple answer is no. There are other costs associated with the project that needs to be factored in and managed within the overall project budget. So variations to contract sum, which is what we're talking about at the moment with respect to this item, needs to be managed within the conditions of contract, whereas the monitoring of variation and or any changes that impact on the project budget would be what, as the CEO was mentioning earlier, is what we would bring to the chamber if it was seen that we would need to have a further discussion about available project budget.
Thank you.
So through the chair, and
CEO?
I just want to also point out that the procurement policy adopted by council actually reinforces that variations, which is plural, should not exceed the overall project budget, which is another reason why, in addition to just good project management governance, we would also still come well before we came near the risk of exceeding the allocated contingency of 100,000.
Councillor Hart, did you have another question? No? You're right for the moment. Anyone else have questions? Thank you. So we have a motion before us. Does any councillor wish to move the motion?
Can I move a motion that we accept the recommendation from the officers as recommended in 3 within the material provided to the councillors?
Do I have a seconder? Thanks. Councillor Arnott.
Who's seconded?
Oh, is there? Okay, sorry. Sorry, Kate. Is it opposed?
I have an amendment when you're ready, but I imagine you'll be calling Councillor Arnott to speak first.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Look, this is for the awarding of the contract for the public toilets development to the particular contractor nominated for 1.168 million. It authorises, obviously, officers to continue to monitor that project, of which they are suitably qualified to do. We have heard from our executive officers and our CEO as to what is the practice of this organisation, and we've actually seen what that practice is, to regularly report back to council on the progress of these sorts of projects, and that would be reported back to council in an appropriate manner before it even got anywhere near chewing up the 100,000 that we've put in just now for the contingency fund. And we've been through a significant process for tendering for this project to make sure that we get due value for the community, and it's not just about the cheapest cost, it's about getting it done preferably locally, with good support and with a contractor of whom we have confidence will complete the project in an appropriate manner to a quality outcome, and that certainly is the case with the nominated contractor. So it's with those sorts of comments that I would like to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Hanson?
Yep, I'll be supporting this motion. It's a very exciting project, the redevelopment of the Memorial Square public toilets. And, you know, I very much look forward to this project being complete.
Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Chair. I'm moving an amendment which changes point 4 to put a limit on the variations that can be approved by the superintendent to any individual variation to $10,000, an accumulative total of 60, and I believe that our excellent officers have those wordings up there. I might just check it while we're... Oops, it's gone. It's coming. So all the focus for you, Chair, is around changing point 4.
We need a seconder for that amendment. Councillor Costin. Do we ask for an opposer? Councillor Hart, do you want to speak to that amendment?
Yes, certainly. Chair, and I note my focus should be on the amendment, but I do acknowledge that this is a significant, important project, and that's what you'd expect when council's putting, around $1.2 million into this building project. But I think regardless of how important a project is, there needs to be proper scrutiny and oversights. I appreciate there's been some constructive changes in this council in recent years. However, it wasn't that long ago that council had substantial cost blowouts on a number of projects, many of them construction projects. I don't think it's good enough that councillors are simply told after the event. It's hardly transparent and accountable and doesn't allow councillors to have any input to any concerns that might arise. I think that what council should have in place is to require variations over a certain amount to require the approval of council. That is councillors at a council meeting. It's not much use telling us after the event the project's blown out by $100,000 or more. This, if, as has been put to us, all the cost controls are in place, then this would give sufficient flexibility for approval of variations of $10,000, excluding GST, and approval of up to a total of $60,000, and we would only need to come to us under this clause if it exceeds those amounts. This is not interfering with council management of the contract. All of that would still happen with the council officers. It's simply a matter that councillors could scrutinise and question cost increases before they're approved and make the final decision one way or another based on that advice. It's all very well to pass a project and say it will cost $1.15 million, which is what's in the agenda. But the real cost is the final cost, and there's been too often construction contracts in Colac Otway Shire that have cost substantially more, and councillors have found out after the increases have been agreed to. Again, if the process is handled properly, this will still give the flexibility the council needs, but it gives some reassurance to the community that if this starts to get out of hand, we'll be there early in the process and not simply getting a memo at the end of the process.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Costin.
Thank you. Like Councillor Hart, I think we do receive better financial information than we did before, but I think our community has a long memory of cost blowouts in past projects, and the expectation is that councillors will be on top of any variation, any sizable variation to contracts. So call me ultra-conservative if you like, but I think this is a role that our community expects of councillors. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Costin. Now, Councillor Arnott, sorry.
I would like to speak against the amendment, if I may, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Whilst I understand where Councillor Hart and Costin are getting to with this, I am concerned with that from a process perspective. I would ask the question, what happens if a problem occurs that exceeds this $10,000 limit for one particular variation on Thursday after a meeting, and work stops then for a month until we get to another council meeting before we can have that approved? I think that that would be possibly problematic. But more than that, we need to understand that it is the responsibility of councillors, yes, to put in place to understand what's happening in this, but that should be put in place with a proper governance process in the background to make sure that we have the right people employed to do the job, that we have the right processes in place so that they can perform their job, and that we then hold them accountable for that purpose. So it's not about micromanaging, it's about making sure you have that governance process in place. And I actually believe that from this council's perspective, that has been actively demonstrated even within tonight with our acceptance of the financial reports and the demonstration of the expansion of the contingency for this particular project and for other projects, and the other reporting that we're receiving proactively from this executive, who have proactively assisted us in setting up this governance process so that we can be reassured within ourselves and reassure our community that in fact we do have comfort that these projects will be completed appropriately.
You, Councillor Arnott. Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Arnott, and I won't be supporting this amendment. Because I do also have the same concerns that we don't want to sort of have the project hamstrung by every time there's a small variation or that it has to come back to council. I think we also do have to have trust in our processes and the council officers. And yes, while I have been on council, there have been some projects that have blown out significantly. There's also a lot of projects that have been delivered been delivered on time and on budget. Some projects actually are under budget, and we don't often talk about those projects. And there are many, many projects that have been delivered on time and under budget, and significant projects at that. But, like Councillor Hart keeps reminding us, there have been, projects in the past that haven't gone that way at all, and we do need to learn from those mistakes. But I think the biggest lesson you can learn from those mistakes is actually to get your internal processes right, not to sort of bring everything back to the chamber. So I would be far more focused on those internal processes being right, and you do have to have trust in the officers that you have employed to actually implement these projects. So I won't be supporting this amendment, although I do understand where you're coming from.
Councillor Finnegan.
I find myself torn by this amendment. I can see the merits of both sides of the argument. I think that it's important that we have the right people in the right roles, and I think that our executive, as Councillor Arnott and Councillor Hanson have pointed out, have done a fantastic job in ensuring transparency like moving forward. However, I am more than aware of the history of cost blowouts in construction projects within the Colac Otway Shire. With that being said, I feel that the amount put forth by Councillor Hart in this amendment is, I feel, too low. And on that note, I will be running against this amendment, but I would like to foreshadow that I have a further amendment should this one not succeed.
Councillor Hart, you've got a right to reply.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't think this is micromanaging. At most, there would be 6 variations if they were $10,000. Well, it's only if they're more than $10,000 each, so it wouldn't even be 6 variations. If it was urgent, it could be dealt with at a special meeting, and I'd say that's a heck of a lot inconvenient than trying to fix these things after the event. You don't have to go back to council's history very far to see that situation happening. If the changes are working and there is some green shoots, some reason to be optimism that things have improved in Colac Otway Shire, then this clause change will not make any difference. If the variations are functioning properly and the costs are being done and what have you, then there will be no need to exceed the $60,000 in total changes. So I can't see any downside in having this safeguard. I think it's a real risk, but if we have this safeguard and everything's going smoothly, that's great. This actually will not change anything. This will only change something if costs are starting to run out of control. And that's exactly why we need something like this.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Costin, did you want to? No? No more? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll put it to a vote on the amendment. Those in favour of the amendment? Councillor Costin, Councillor Hart. That's those against the amendment? Those against? 4-2. Division? 4 in favour. Councillor Costin, Councillor Hart against. Councillor Arnott, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Hanson and Councillor White. So now we return to the original motion.
And I believe I've foreshadowed I've got another amendment, which is substantially similar to Councillor Hart's amendment, but where it says, essentially the writing is in blue there, authorises General Manager, Community and Economy as a Superintendent for Contract 2401 Memorial Square Public Toilet Redevelopment, with the condition that any proposed variation that would increase the overall cost by more than 5% of the project total, will require approval through resolution of council to council meeting prior to the superintendent making any determination.
Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. Your amendment seems very close to the proposed amendment. I'd just like to get some advice around that. Marlo, could you offer?
Yeah, no, but I'm
What's
saying,
the difference?
Yeah, no, it's... essentially where it says, if you go by more than, so where it says 10,000, so by more than 5%. So any variation from 5%.
Chair, I think the answer you're looking for is on page 17 of the governance rules, and it's point 32. I think I know what you might be thinking of, but the point 32 says any number of amendments may be proposed at a motion, but only one in the time can be accepted by the chair. I think what you might have been thinking of is that if a notice of motion is defeated, there's limits on when you can move another motion on the same matter, but this is what was defeated was an amendment. Yep. And I don't think there's any restrictions on amendments. It's point 30, as again, if you go to point 32 in the governance rules.
So I think the first step is let's be really clear on the wording that Councillor Finnegan is proposing. An amendment is a motion to amend, so it is still a motion and is debated as a motion. A notice of motion is still a motion, and a motion is a motion. So let's get the wording right, and then we can work out with our Manager of Governance. No, because amendment is also governed by motions. Yeah, let's get the wording. think you should use your discretion.
Okay, just go with it. I'm just waiting on the final advice. Okay. The final wording.
So, Councillor Finnegan, can I suggest that rather than contract cost, you amend that to something that reflects contract language, which would probably be the adjusted contract sum? The contract cost isn't known until your final contract is done. You're looking for progressive approvals, I think, and therefore your adjusted contract sum is the approved contract amount at any point in time. And so I think that would be a more accurate
Yes,
wording.
thank you. I'm happy to be led with the wording on that one.
Looking at Ms Gardner. No, it's called the adjusted contract sum.
Chair, may I
Councillor Hart?
make a comment I'll just throw it in. I think it would be, a dollar figure would be more clear. But if Councillor Finnegan's locked in on talking 5% of some words of something else, I'll second it. But I think a dollar figure would make it crystal clear.
Councillor Finnegan, where do you want to land with this amendment?
I'm happy with 5% because I feel that's something that we could possibly look at carrying over into future things when we review our processes in future. So,
From 1.168, it would be 58,000. That would be the starting one.
So the round figure would be?
If the contract is awarded for 1.168 million,
58,441.
I'm just looking at, have officers got any concern about interpreting this amendment? Yep.
Okay. So do I have a seconder for this amendment? Thank you, Councillor Hart. Do I have Councillor Finnegan? You will oppose it, Kate. Thank you, Councillor Hanson.
As I mentioned during the debate for the previous amendment, I'm sort of in two minds. I can see the arguments from both sides. We've had project overruns, but I think we should have faith in our executive. But I do feel that overruns of around more than 5% should come back to us for consideration on whether or not we approve them. So that's why I voted against the last one, why I'm moving my own amendment with this 5% figure, which, yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is a good compromise. This introduces some level of cost control. I think some of the concerns that others had about having to come back for every $10,000 or whatever, well, that's obviously not an issue with this particular amendment. This is just if you get to a point where you've got more than 5% of the adjusted contract sum, which is around that, well, it's around that $60,000 figure, somewhere around there. And I don't know why we're so scared of this. Much better to have this level of safeguard than to get a memo. Keep in mind, eventually the price of what this actually costs will come out. Do you really want to get a memo in April or May or June that the price has gone up $100,000 or $150,000? Oh, there was good reason. And it doesn't matter how many questions you ask if that happens. It's too late. But again, if it is all handled in a manner we hope it will be, this will not make any difference. It will only make any difference if something is getting a little bit out of control. So why wouldn't we have that degree of scrutiny, safeguard and comfort that the community didn't get out of a particularly notable project that I mentioned earlier? Community gets this stuff. They absolutely get this stuff. Why aren't you watching what's going on? Well, here's us watching what's going on and having a circuit breaker. a circuit breaker that didn't exist with Blue Water, didn't exist with the various kindergarten projects, didn't exist with the two-way radios.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Hanson?
I did oppose, and I opposed for the same reasons why I didn't vote in favour of the last amendment. And I'll just remind, I'll sound like a broken record, Council delivers an enormous amount of projects and deliver an enormous amount of projects on time and within budget. We have got significantly improved processes. A couple of items that we've already seen on the agenda tonight actually, speak to those improved processes and transparency. Something I think that the community does really want is projects delivered timely, and so therefore I would prefer to put trust in the governance and the processes of the project management than have everything coming back to the chamber. So it's probably a difference of process that we've got here rather than really what we're overall all trying to achieve.
Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Acting Chair. I'd also like to speak against this motion. Whilst I understand the intent, again, I sort of don't accept that there's no safeguards in place now. We know what's going to happen. We've already seen this in practice where the executive comes back to us for a report when things are going beyond what they consider might be a comfortable margin, and we've already seen that in practice more than once within this council. I take comfort in the process that we've achieved so far, the comfort in the tender process, comfort in the design process, comfort in the consultation up to that, comfort in the questions that councillors have had to ask in respect to the tender process, comfort that we've got a really good contractor that we know does a good job within this community, that's being appointed to it, and I think that's where some of the other things have come unstuck. We haven't gone for necessarily the cheapest, we've gone for what we consider to be the best for the money, for the value, and we will be watching it as it's going. And I'd have to ask, well, what is going to happen if you're going to be brought back as a circuit breaker, as suggested? What are we going to do? We're going to stop the project? We're going to cut 4 cubicles off this toilet if it goes 50 grand over? I don't see that as a logical step in this. So as long as we're getting reassurance that our governance process will be followed, as we've seen to date, I don't support this. I think we need to do, as Councillor Hanson said, trust our governance process. This is what we put it in place for.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Councillor Finnegan. Would you like to? Oh, Councillor Costin.
I'll support this alternate motion put up by Councillor Finnegan. Amendment, if you like. But I don't see it something that is needed in the longer term as our processes improve. I think we should look at this as a one-off context. It's a very large contract, but we need to have confidence that in the future there will be some degree of transparency that is driving the project superintendent to not just issue cost escalations, variations willy-nilly, but there is some degree of checking in the process. So, but I'd like to see, well, I expect that we will put some processes, more transparent processes in the future, but I think based on our past experience that this is an expectation of our community, and it's perhaps an old-style expectation of councillors, but I think it's worth pursuing in this case for this very high profile project. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Costin. So, Councillor Finnegan.
Yeah, sorry.
Last call.
Reply. Thank you. I'd just like to say that, I do sort of want to echo the points that have been made by Councillor Hanson and Councillor Arnott in opposition to this matter, and I think that the council has done a great job in cleaning things up in relation to how our projects are run, how we report on things and bringing things back to council. But I do believe, as been said by Councillor Costin and Councillor Hart, that, you know, cost overruns on such a large project, I feel, you know, an amount of 5% coming back to us for a say on, you know, how we proceed is a good thing, and I think the community would expect that from us. Now, in saying that, this could be something that's not necessarily needed on every project moving forward. It is something that we could perhaps look into with our processes into the future and go, okay, if a project is over, if a contract is over X amount of dollars, you know, we have this sort of contingency in place already, and we don't have to debate these things in the chamber. But at the end of the day, I think it's prudent for us to do this, and that's why I've put the amendment forward.
Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. I'll now call for a vote on Councillor Finnegan's amendment. All those in favour? Councillor Hart, Councillor Costin, Councillor Finnegan. Those against? Councillor Arnott, Councillor Hanson, Councillor White.
Division? Sorry.
So now I use my casting vote. I can't support this amendment, and I'm not in favour of it.
Division.
Division. All those in favour? Councillor Hart, Councillor Costin, Councillor Finnegan. Those against? Councillor Arnott, Councillor Hanson, Councillor White. And the casting vote. So the amendment is lost 3-4. So now we go back to the substantive motion.
So the mover and the speaker have spoken.
Which was moved by Councillor Arnott and seconded by Councillor Hanson. Is anyone else want to speak?
Yeah, I've already spoken to that, I believe, haven't I? Yes, thank you.
Yep. Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I haven't spoken to the motion as such. I've tried to confine myself to the amendment, so I'd like to speak to the motion itself. Yep. I'm really quite disappointed and quite torn because this is such an important project, and I really want to see that this improved toilet block is constructed. But I can't support a resolution that has the open-ended part of Clause 4. I just can't support that lack of oversight. There's the potential for significant cost overruns, perhaps 100,000 or more. It's not really clear how much it is, with no councillor input. So with proper cost control, I would be more than happy to support this because I support the construction of the Memorial Square toilets. And I know it'll be painted, oh, you don't want the toilets to be done or you don't want the money spent. Yes, I want the project done, I want it completed. But I don't want this massive, I can't be a party to endorsing the risks that I see from not having any oversight of council on Clause 4. If all goes well, the amendments that have been rejected wouldn't have been necessary anyway, but they would have been there as a safeguard. So my only hope with all of this, and I'm sure it's going to get through today, is that council discloses publicly the actual cost of this project. As soon as it's known, as soon as any cost increase in quarterly reports, I'll probably be asking in future reports next year, where's this project at? We need to know exactly what this cost when it was completed and compare that with the price that it says in the agenda today. Absolute transparency on that, but I can't be a party to supporting such a lack of proper cost control and oversight.
Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Acting Chair. I obviously would have preferred that my amendment had passed, as I presume Councillor Hart is in the same boat. With that being said, this is something, you know, this contract, this project is something that's dearly needed. You know, we really need to refresh what we currently have for our public restrooms in Memorial Square. And I do believe that, given the robust debate we've had over a couple of amendments in the chamber here, and the fact that half the councillors in the room have voted for one of the amendments, and there was a casting vote used, and bearing in mind that that council officers have been very proactive in their support, in bringing, you know, cost overruns or potential cost overruns to us in briefings and the like as time has gone on. I've seen it in my time on council. I've obviously just been here since January, but it's been really refreshing for me to see. And bearing that in mind, I do have faith in the officers, particularly considering that there's been a couple of closely fought amendments here, looking at oversight, that if things are looking a bit dicey, that you'll come to us for guidance. And for those reasons, I will vote for the officer recommendation.
Anybody else? Okay. Councillors, I'll call for a vote on the original recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Carried 5-1. All those in favour? Councillor Arnott, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Hanson, Councillor White. Those against? Councillor Hart. Councillor Costin? Oh, in favour. I think it's a good time now to call a break. Thank you, everybody.
Rightio, are we ready, everyone? Thanks, Councillor White, for chairing in my absence.
It's a pleasure, Mayor.
And we'll continue, councillors. Item 9.6, Contract 2408, Software Licence and Services Agreement with Civica Proprietary Limited. The purpose of this report is to seek council agreement to formalise its arrangements with Civica Proprietary Limited for enterprise software through entering Contract 2408, Software Licence and Services Agreement with Civica Proprietary Limited. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Arnott.
Can the officers explain for our ratepayers, please, what we use this software licences for?
Through you, Mayor. So the software, the authority system, is our basic fundamental software system that runs a number of our programs, including payroll, rates, revenue, our customer request management system and things like that. So it's the fundamental piece of software that underpins our operations.
So without this software support, we would have significant difficulties.
Significant, yes, significant difficulties.
Thank you.
Yep.
We go back to pen and paper.
But basically, that's what would have to happen. That's right.
Thank you.
Councillor Costin and Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Mayor. Question of officers. How do we know that this is value for money?
This went through a process some time ago. What we're trying to do with this is to reset our arrangement with Civica and have a formal contractual arrangement around it. But it also gives us some time to, over the next couple of years, have a look and see if this is still the system that we want to run with. So we couldn't continue, in our view, to manage the contract and the arrangement, the relationship the way we were without the formal arrangements and documentation underpinning the relationship. And so we've just sought to reset that, and we'll do that for a period of 3 years, and then we'll, over that time, reassess whether or not this is still value for money and a product we want to maintain.
Thank you. So that means at the end of the 3 years, there will be a competitive tender?
Well, we'll do the assessment, but we'd have to do that well before the 3 years, because if we're going to move to another provider, then there's a lot of transition time needed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillors' officers have provided a recommendation with a report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this? Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Is there a seconder, please? Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Is it be opposed? Councillor Arnott, did you wish to talk?
Thank you. As demonstrated with the questions to the officers, this is a fundamental component of the software requirements for this organisation to operate. Without it, we would be going back to snail mail and everything by pen and paper, and probably have to employ a significant larger number of people in order to facilitate that outcome. So whilst this seems like a significant amount of money, it actually saves money through efficiency of technology. And I actually appreciate the awareness and forthright of council officers and executive to bring this to us, to remind us that the existing agreement was not appropriately in place any longer, and that it needed a renewal in this context. And of course, we're not going to use this as an opportunity to change the software provider, because that in itself can be quite disruptive and costly. It needs the proper evaluation. This is just to make sure we can continue to do this for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson, did you wish to speak? Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried 7-0. That's a bit unfair there, Councillor Hart, but anyway. Councillors, item 9.7, appointment of Audit and Risk Committee Chair and reappointment of independent member. The purpose of this report is to consider the reappointment of independent Audit and Risk Committee member and appointment of Audit and Risk Committee Chairperson. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Thanks, councillors. Officers provide a recommendation with the report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor White. Is there a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Hanson. To be opposed, Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say that in my time on the Audit and Risk Committee, Brian's been a fantastic chair and wish to publicly thank him for his work and wish him all the best moving on. And in my time on the Risk Committee, we've worked very well with Melissa as well, and I'd like to endorse that recommendation. So I'd like to move. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, I'd just also like to thank Brian for his time on our Audit and Risk Committee. Brian, I think, is he's got other things that he wants to do these days. He's not just stepping down from the Colac Otway Shire, he's stepping down from sort of a number of different roles I don't know whether it's to pursue travel, spend more time with his family, but I wish him all the very best and thank him for the time with the Colac Otway Shire. I think Melissa Field is a very good appointment as chairperson if this motion is carried. Certainly in my time on the Audit and Risk Committee, she's a very active member of the committee and very experienced. And of course that then it does mean that we do have a vacancy and we will be advertising, to fill that vacancy on the Audit and Risk Committee as well.
Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Now we move to item 9.8, authorisation of officers under the Planning and Environment Act 1987, Arch Narani and Sean O'Keefe. The purpose of this report is for Council to appoint Arch Narani, Statutory Planner, and Sean O'Keefe, Strategic Planner, as authorised officers under Section 147(4) of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Thanks, councillors. Officers have provided a recommendation with a report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this, please? Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. Seconded, please. Thanks, Councillor Hanson. To be opposed? Councillor Finnegan, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, just to say that this is one of those standard things that we as councillors have to do from time to time as people come into the organisation. We have to authorise them, to act under the Act, I guess, to carry out their duties and do what is done by officers in the normal course of their roles day to day.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson. Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Any other councillor? Thanks, councillors. I'll put the motion to vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Item 9, S6, Instrument of Delegation, Council to members of Council staff update. The purpose of this report is to seek Council approval and updated Section 6 Instrument of Delegation from Council to members of staff for each of the relevant acts and regulations as a result of the biannual update to legislation as advised by Maddox Legal Services. Are there any questions of officers? Thanks, Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. On page 240, it appears that this seems to be fairly straightforward. There's just one change to Section 181 of the Planning and Environment Act. But can I get an assurance that all the various safeguards we have with planning matters, that if there's 4 objections, they come to councillors, if someone wants to build a house in the rural zone, the recommendations against it, and a number of others, as far as I can tell, none of those have been changed. Is that a fair conclusion, that it's just this one thing?
Lots of nods. Would someone
you,
verbally
yes, I can
agree with that?
Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Marlo. Any other questions? Councillors' officers have provided a recommendation for the report. Do any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this, please? Thanks, Councillor Hart. Is to be seconded? Councillor Arnott, thank you. To be opposed? Thank you. Councillor Hart, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, briefly, the instrument of delegation essentially outlines who can do what in the council organisation, and I do note and thank the council officers for that assurance that some safeguards we introduced in relation to planning matters are still in there. The only change is as outlined on page 240 on the agenda. Just one change.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. And within the context of this, I'd just like to thank Councillor Hart. He tends to be the person that goes through these to make sure that they do tick the right boxes. I often see the emails with questions from him in respect to documents like this where he's clarified something. So I think that it's good that we have someone that has the capacity and willingness to put that time in. So thank you, and to ask the appropriate questions. But all else aside, I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried 7-0. Item 9.10, purpose of this report is to receive information from the Colac Otway Shire Audit and Risk Committee biannual risk report. Do councillors have any questions of officers? No questions. Councillors, officer provided a recommendation for the report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this? Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Seconder. Thanks, Councillor White. Is to be opposed? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, just briefly, I've been on the Audit and Risk Committee the first time for the last almost 12 months. This report, I think, is well worth all councillors, I'm sure they've read it, but rereading. It just gives an update on sort of some of the items that have been presented to the Audit and Risk Committee. It's the biannual report. It just highlights some of the things that have come to the Audit and Risk Committee, on a fairly sort of high level. It's sort of a high level report. It goes through some of the risk management issues, the internal control environment. It sort of details some items around fraud prevention and control and cyber security, which is a major risk for councils. I think it's actually, it actually is a very good report. So I certainly encourage all councillors to read the Audit and Risk Biannual Report.
Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Councillor White.
Just to say that under the leadership of Brian, who brought the report to a council briefing last week, it's demonstrated that the ARC does provide good, consistent and constructive oversight, and it gives a good overview of the year's progress and the responsibilities and activities for the period. So yes, I'd like to encourage people to have a good look at the report. It gives a good overview of the activities of the committee.
Thanks, Councillor White. Any other councillor? Councillor Arnott.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to support this recommendation and to note that I have had the opportunity to read through some of the reports and the minutes of this Audit Risk Committee. I commend the work of the committee and to give assurances to the community that the committee actually oversees quite substantial background operations of the organisation to make sure that things are ticking over right, to make sure the finances are where they should be, to make sure that the risks are notified or at least recognised and dealt with appropriately. So it is an important role within this organisation. I thank the councillors White and Hanson for being part of that.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Any other councillor? Councillors, I'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Item 9.11, Audit and Risk Committee meeting, confirmed minutes 16th of August 2023. Purpose of this report is to provide information to the Colac Otway Shire Audit and Risk Committee confirmed minutes dated 16th of August 2023. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillors, officers have provided a recommendation with a report. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this? Councillor White, thank you. Is there a seconder, please? Thanks, Councillor Hanson. To be opposed? Councillor White.
Just very briefly to say, I think the minutes are self-explanatory, and I would like to recommend that we accept the minutes.
Thanks, Councillor Watt. Councillor Anderson, thank you. Any other councillor? Thank you, councillors. I'll put the motion to vote. All those in favour? It's carried 7-0. Item 9.12 is just a matter of noting, report of informal meeting of councillors. Item 10.1 has been withdrawn from the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Costin. Councillors, will move to item 10.2, notice of motion, Colac BMX. Councillor Costin, this is your notice of motion. We'd just like to briefly describe the purpose of the motion.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of the motion, there's three parts to the motion. The first part, part one, attempts to do a stock take of where we're at, and I think the answer is nowhere, really. Second part addresses a letter we received from a group of people wanting to form a local BMX club, and the third part just proposes a way forward to look beyond the BMX club and what we might do in the future, because I think we've allocated money and then we haven't allocated money. So,
thanks, Councillor Costin. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Costin.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask a question, if I may.
Yeah, Councillor Costin was going to ask a question. Is that right, Graham? You had your hand up?
Question of officers, yes. Yep. So we allocated $10,000 in the 22-23 budget to look at some sort of BMX or bike facility in Colac, Apollo Bay or Birregurra, I recall. But we didn't have enough money to do that. Did that $10,000 carry forward to the next year, or didn't we allocate any money at all in the following year?
Thanks, Mr. Surin.
Through you, Mayor, that $10,000 is still available.
Ah. Very good.
Keep a lid on it, Councillor Costin. Another question?
So was there a business case for that $10,000? Do we already have a business case somewhere as well, or don't we quite have a business case?
Through you, Mayor. So for context, the way that money was allocated into the council budget, there was some money allocated by council for project scoping. So it was one of a number of projects that we had some money for to scope out to get to project ready, so to do some designs and things like that. So my understanding was it was in 21-22 and it had been carried forward. But what we found through some investigations by officers is that the $10,000 was not going to be enough to undertake community consultation, review different locations, understand what the community's expectations were, and then come up with some concept designs that would enable us to get funding, whether that be through a council budget process or external funding.
And the amount we needed at that time was $30,000, is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, so we've been in contact with a number of trail designers or the consultancies that do this type of work, and if we were to do the consultation work and to come up with designs and test that with the community, plus site surveys and things like that to make sure the designs would work, would be in the order of $40,000 to $50,000.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott, you've been waiting.
Just one last one. So how does that sit? How does 40 to 50,000 now, the price has gone up it seems, sit with the $240,000 feasibility study in the Colac Reserves planning project? Seems to be a huge difference in cost there.
Through you, Mayor, I think my understanding is the wording in the City Reserves planning project is not 100% accurate, so that $100,000 was intended to be for design and construction. But the way it reads is it looks like it's for design.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Costin. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mayor. Has there been a consideration of where a community level style track would situate within this area?
Through you, Mayor, there's a number of strategic plans that we have that identify potential sites for some kind of bike facility, sort of dirt jumps and the like. One being the Lake Colac Foreshore Master Plan, which identifies Hugh Murray Reserve as a potential site, but also the Ilmenite Recreation Reserve Master Plan, which was completed in 2018. And from an officer's perspective, that site would lend itself much better to bike facilities because it has other infrastructure such as public toilets and car parking and things like that, where the Hugh Murray Reserve doesn't have that. So, yeah, there's some strategic planning work that has been done.
Councillor Finnegan.
I'd just like to flag I've got an alternative motion should this motion not proceed forward or be lost.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Costin.
Just one of officers again. We received a open letter of 225 signatures. Have we responded to that letter in any way?
Through you, Mayor, I would need to take that on notice, Councillor Costin. I'm not 100% sure whether we've responded as yet.
Thank you.
Councillor White.
Just asking, is it normal practice for council to support community members to set up clubs from scratch, which seems to be the part of this norm? Can you just tell me a bit about whether that's normal practice around helping clubs set up from scratch?
Through you, Mayor, in my time with council, I've never experienced the need to do that. Typically, that would probably be the role of the state sporting association and or the regional sports assembly. So in this case, it'd be Leisure Networks that can provide some assistance. We can provide some advice, but it's not typically a role that we would play.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Costin, you wish to move your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The motion's up on the board there behind you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion? There's no seconder for the motion. The motion lapses. In view of that, Councillor Finnegan, I won't allow you to move an alternative motion.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And
thank you. And councillors, that concludes the meeting for tonight. Thank you for your work. Thanks, officers.
Thank you, Mayor.